The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, lovely people, and welcome to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on the wireless set. Tonight on the show, I'll be joined by American author Alex Epstein to talk about the president of COP28 saying there is no science behind demands for a phase-out of fossil fuels and that it would, quote, take the world back into caves. I'll then be joined by the chairman of Third Generation Environmentalism, Tom Burke, who says we need to act now to avoid a climate catastrophe. And finally, I'll be talking to a group of amateur archaeologists who came across a 15th century Tudor palace in Northamptonshire after a 5-year search. Amazing stuff, all of that and lots of chat with my panellist and friend Ingrid Tarrant. But first, an update on the headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Neil. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of Leanne Gordon, who was shot dead in East London on Tuesday evening. The boy has also been charged with attempted murder of a 20-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy.
He was also charged with possession of a firearm and possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. He will appear at Barkingside Magistrates Court on Monday. Met Police have arrested 2 protesters at a pro-Palestine march in London today. Thousands of people gathered to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Met Police arrested a man on suspicion of a racially aggravated public order offence for allegedly displaying a placard comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. A second man was arrested for carrying an offensive placard. UN officials say there's enough food aid available in Egypt and Jordan to reach 1 million people in Gaza amid fears of humanitarian aid collapsing. Under a new system, supplies would come to the Kerem Shalom crossing on the border between Israel, Gaza and Egypt for the first time. The UN says trucks need to be allowed to enter Gaza directly to alleviate any increasingly desperate situation in the enclave. Israel has so far rebuffed pleas from the United Nations to access the crossing. Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Carl Scow, says operation is critical.
We need Kerem Shalom to open. Yesterday I think we were trying to use Kerem Shalom for the first time for verification, but not for entry. We need that also so that we can have more order around the UN convoys coming in and to some degree separate them from the rest of the aid that is flowing in through Rafah. And of course, we need a humanitarian ceasefire so that there is the space and the operational environment inside to deliver to all those that need it and in a controlled and orderly way.
The Lib Dems are calling for an investigation to see whether the Prime Minister breached the ministerial code for failing to declare a £100 million payment to Rwanda. It was sent to Kigali in April on top of the £140 million already paid. That brings the total to £240 million. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has warned Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill doesn't go far enough. The Times reports the Rwanda legislation has been given only a 50% at best chance of successfully getting flights off the ground next year. Members of multiple unions met today to argue against anti-strike laws after 18 months of industrial action. Hundreds of thousands of workers have taken action over pay and conditions. It's as regulations to ensure minimum levels of service came into force yesterday. This is the first time in 40 years the TUC assembled a special national conference. TUC General Secretary Paul Nowak says the Strike Act is unfit for modern-day workers.
Going on strike is a basic protection that working people have relied on for generations. But today, we've got a Tory government that feels threatened by that basic protection. Threatened by the organised working class, threatened by workers having the temerity to stand up. And their response? Reach out for that old Thatcherite playbook, slap more restrictions on unions, bully working people into keeping quiet.
Court documents reveal the late Queen wanted protection for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex after they abstained from royal duties. An extract from a letter written by the late Queen's private secretary, Sir Edward Young, states it is imperative that the family continues to be provided with effective security. In a statement, Prince Harry said he feared for his family's safety and felt forced to leave the UK. He is suing Associated Newspapers Limited over an article about his legal challenge against the Home Office following a decision to change his security arrangements. And a rare white alligator has been born for the first time in captivity. The female reptile is one of only 7 leucistic alligators in the world, according to officials at the theme park in Florida where she was born. They are the rarest genetic variation in the American alligator, differing from albinos, which have pink eyes and a complete loss of pigment. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
I received this letter this week from a viewer in the Netherlands about her experience of the past 3 years and how much she came to count on independent media online. Quote, "It's been a strange, scary but also wondrous journey for me," she wrote, "and at times I really felt like I was losing my marbles. Finding those voices online has helped me immensely in keeping myself grounded just by knowing I wasn't the only one seeing what I thought I was seeing. Oddly enough, it was finding those voices that made me give myself permission to trust my intuition. Looking back, I wonder why and how I ever became that person that doubted their own judgment. Trusting myself made me refuse the vax and not participate in the QR code for admission foolery. I'm so grateful I did, and relieved I'll never have to look back and feel ashamed for not sticking to my principles. Amen to all that, sister. With those words in mind, I want to start by offering some early Christmas cheer, and if not cheer exactly, encouragement to those who've spent years putting up with the dog's abuse for standing in the face of ruthless and relentless state propaganda and lies. Propaganda and lies that are still pushed now. If I could take my most sincere love and admiration and put it in a big red box tied with a golden bow, it would go first and foremost to all those who found their voices and spoke. I raise the next of several glasses to those who said no to the COVID jabs, products pushed by the unholy alliance of governments and big pharma, and cheered on by supine media flat on its face and crawling in hope of reward. We were right, every one of us, who started with a simple no thank you towards those jabs, and then, in the face of non-stop bullying, ridicule, hatred, exclusion from here, there and everywhere, inability to travel, and finally loss of employment, and kept going with our efforts to keep safe ourselves and, infinitely more important, our children. To all those I say, we were right, and that simple knowledge must be its own reward, for there will be no other, on account of the fact that no good deed ever goes unpunished. We were right, you were right. A war was waged against you, is still being waged, but you, outnumbered and embattled, have won that war in every way that matters, regardless of what might happen next. Standing ground and holding firm when every evil trick in the book was pulled, eagerly aided and abetted by that mainstream media, quote, it's time to punish Britain's 5 million vaccine refuseniks. Remember that one? And countless comments online calling for the unjabbed to be held down in the street and dealt with, refused medical care. Shrugging all that off and keeping on was a damn tough bullet to chew, but you did it and you were right. We are right. By now, the AstraZeneca offering, pumped into countless millions of arms, has been withdrawn and labelled defective. And the state of Texas is suing Pfizer. Imagine that. Texas is one of only 2 US states with a population in excess of 30 million, the size of a medium country. And the state prosecutor there is taking Pfizer to court, alleging, amongst much else, that their jab, pushed into billions more arms around the world, was, get this, just 0.85% effective against COVID. Less than 1%, for God's sake. And that's without getting into the deaths and harms undeniably resultant from all those products marketed and pushed as vaccines. Pfizer, now accused of misleading the people, long ago admitted they didn't test to see if their product would stop the passing of COVID from person to person because they weren't asked to. And yet safe and effective was the mantra of all mantras. Take this now or you'll be murdering Granny. Safe and effective, eh? Ho, ho, ho. All those months when just mentioning the jabs in a negative light was like saying Voldemort's name out loud, when independent media channels faced censure and worse just for asking questions about them. And now here we are. The AstraZeneca jab is withdrawn and called defective, and Pfizer are being sued by the state of Texas. All those accusations of misinformation, disinformation and malinformation levelled at anyone who so much as put their hand up and asked a question. And yet even now, with Pfizer in court, CEO Albert Bourla's empty boasting of 95% effectiveness for his company's product is still out there, officially unchallenged, no apologies for false claims. And with endless testimony from the likes of Joe Biden on down, still chanting the safe and effective nonsense. We know now that when Big Pharma found itself with lakes of unsold product in the face of what they called hesitancy, Biden's White House told Big Tech to silence any questioning of the jabs, and Google and Facebook and others obliged. We know this. We can say this now without fear of contradiction. Those who stood and continue to stand in the face of all that, I raise a glass to you and with you and wish you good cheer. To those of you who called out in the face of more propaganda, the war in Ukraine, another raised glass. It was about saving democracy, we were told. It was nothing to do with NATO expansion, we were told. Putin had to be stopped in the Ukraine or he would invade the rest of Europe, we were told. There was nothing useful to know about the story of Russia and Ukraine before Russian military crossed the border on the 24th of February 2022. Open brackets, don't mention the coup d'etat engineered by the US in 2014 when a democratically elected pro-Moscow president was ousted in favour of a pro-Washington offering, followed by the better part of a decade of murderous attacks on Russian citizens of the Donbass. Close brackets. There might have been an early end to the ugliness, but our own former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was dispatched by NATO to scupper the fledgling peace deal. And so the corpses of more than 500,000 Ukrainian and Russian men, women and boys are cold now in Ukrainian clay. To all those who had questions about all that from the start, who wanted to know more about Ukraine and its tortured history, about Nazis and Baba Yar, about how much money was made by arms manufacturers that lobby ceaselessly and successfully for war without end, about blatant corruption that sees billions made while millions die. To all those who had questions about all of that and thought it better to ask them than to stay quiet while generations were harvested like grass, to all those I say, you were right. To those who look on helplessly at horror heaped upon horror in the Middle East, that benighted so-called Holy Land, to those whose stomachs are turned and hearts broken by unspeakable, unforgiven evil visited upon women and children and just want it all to stop, I say you're right to keep speaking up. I remember the line from the Talmud, "He who saves one life saves the world entire." To those who watch slaughter far away, slaughter that only brings the threat of slaughter closer to our undefended borders, to troubled communities shaken and stirred here at home, I say, keep asking why it must always be this way. I say that now, right now, asking questions is more important than ever, because always underlying all the most obvious malevolent and manipulative manoeuvrings, the horror shows that boil the blood, simmers another narrative of a quite different sort. It's the Rome to which all twisted roads lead, and which more than any other will be our undoing if we don't see it for what it is, the so-called climate crisis. And while we're deliberately distracted by all the rest, by pandemic, by missold medical products, by politicians' lies, by war, by atrocity, we are bled of all our freedoms and rights, and it's those wounds that will hurt us most of all. To all those who use their voices to question the suicide note that is net zero and do so in the face of ridicule and condemnation, we know that we, the human species, are the carbon to be reduced. I salute you too. Last week, the front pages of the relic media were lit up by the revelation that in November, during a video call with a former UN Special Envoy for Climate Change, Sultan Al Jaber of the United Arab Emirates, President of COP28 and Chief Executive of UAE state oil company ADNOC, said there was no science indicating a phase-out of fossil fuels is needed to restrict global heating to 1.5 degrees centigrade, and that to take away oil and gas would take the world back into caves. The Sultan's remarks sparked outrage from the usual suspects, but his choice of words was important. Back into caves. Out of the mouths of babes and sultans, it turns out, comes truth. Those dismissive of any crisis suspect the intention of the suicide note of net zero is precisely, as Al Jaber says, to so impoverish the developed industrialised West that a new dark age ensues, global neo-feudalism that will see a tiny group of unimaginably wealthy people reign over the billions as we scrabble for scraps. Look around now as the nights draw in, as they always do at this time of year in the north, and the sun is absent and the wind doesn't blow, and know that turbines and solar panels ain't going to cut it for the peoples of the northern hemisphere. Know too that claims of climate crisis are the stick with which we are beaten into submission to digital IDs and programmable tokens in place of the freedom to save or spend our earnings as we see fit without the surveillance and permission of the state. To all those who know this, who've been speaking out about this for years, I say your voices are more powerful than perhaps you know. Here's the thing, as the author of the letter I quoted at the top makes clear, even in the darkest of times, we should know we are on a wondrous journey, and the truth is that more and more fellow travellers are joining every day. The more you speak, the easier it becomes to say more. I say, no, you are right. Don't doubt that you are right. Joining me tonight is the broadcaster and TV personality, the wonderful Ingrid Tarrant. Good evening, Ingrid.
Good evening, Neil.
How do you feel at this time of year and listening to what was said in recent days about the climate crisis?
You know, I'm on the same page as you, every single page. Climate change, I've always thought it was a nonsense, even before they started getting rammed down our throats. I understood cyclical changes, experienced extreme climates from like lots of snow one year to not others. I remember in Norway there was snow up to the first floor window as I woke up one morning and there it all was. That was quite rare. We've been able to walk the fjords on ice. Sometimes it's warmer, sometimes it's really cold. And this has been something that I've been quite passionate about. I don't know why, but for years and years, because of nature. I love nature. So, of course, when this started to come out and be rolled out and we were kind of, the brainwashing started, as they so cleverly do, I've just thought this is absolute rubbish. In fact, I did a little, look, now I'm going to show you this. I went to the Museum of London some time ago. It's missing there because somebody was standing in front of the... So there's a head there, so I don't quite know what happens there.
You can see the pattern.
But you can see the pattern. This is the current climate change. We're going back to 400 BC to 50,000... 400,000 BC, sorry, yes, to 50,000 BC, and that's it. And then it's going up and up and up. This demonstrates very clearly that it is completely normal. But we're not helping. I agree, we're not helping, and we've got to start taking responsible steps.
What I want to talk about when it comes to green revolution is things like the pollution that we are carelessly responsible for all over the world. And as part of that, I would say that the use of rare earth minerals, rare earth metals, plastics, and all of the rest of it for the turbines and the rest of the so-called green energy is part of the problem.
Of course it is. It absolutely is.
I care about the greening of the planet.
Yeah.
I want more CO2 in the atmosphere because it's plant food.
Of course, absolutely. And this is the stupidity of it all. They look at the end product. Look, wind turbines and solar panels, forgetting what goes into it. It is sucking the earth more, and then they don't last, and then you can't dispose of them, recycle, so they end up as landfill. So the whole thing is a complete nonsense. What I'm very concerned about, and another thing I have been for years and years and years, is a massive deforestation, because that is, of course, sort of creating a big imbalance of the CO2,
and trees
oxygen.
are another carbon sink.
Yes, there's your balance. And we've always talked about this sort of like the ecosystem and the delicacy of it and the balancing of it. And there is the deforestation has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and it continues to do so. Now, I know steps are being made to reduce it because of the palm oil, getting rid of the palm oil. I really can't stand the people that are saying, let's get rid of all the cows, because we're ruining it all to feed the cattle.
Got to get to a break, but yes, I say the green revolutionaries are not good for the planet. After the break, I'll be joined by American author Alex Epstein to talk about the comment made by Sultan Al Jaber, the president of COP28. He has claimed there's no science indicating that a phase-out of fossil fuels is needed to restrict global heating. Don't go away.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's on your teeth. It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, my first guest tonight is Alex Epstein, who advocates for the expansion of fossil fuels and rejects the scientific consensus on climate change. Alex is the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and Fossil Future, in which he argues for the expanded use of fossil fuels like coal, oil and natural gas. I'm told that Alex is not quite ready to take part in this conversation yet. Ingrid, we can pick up with our shared indignation about the way in which we are browbeaten rather than having our questions entertained in an adult fashion.
But they can browbeat us because they have the money. When I say they, it's the people that are wanting to take control.
We've got Alex.
We've got him.
We've got Alex.
I can't wait to hear him.
Alex joins me now. Hello, Alex. Thank you for joining me once again. We've spoken before.
Yeah, great to be here.
Alex, Sultan Al Jaber, head of COP28, and his comments about how the retreat from fossil fuels will force the people of the world back into caves. What say you about such a person saying such a thing at such a place and time?
Well, I think the part about the caves is 100% true. The other thing he said is not quite true, but let's talk about the caves part first. So fossil fuels provide 80% of the world's energy. They're still growing. They're growing because they're uniquely cost effective. That's why China has 300 new coal plants in development, more than that, actually. And human beings need energy to use machines to prosper and flourish. And the world needs way more energy. So getting rid of fossil fuels means putting us back in the cave, no question at all. Now, what he said, the other thing he said, though, is we don't need a phase out of fossil fuels to go back to to avoid 1.5 degrees C. But what he's arguing there is that we can keep using fossil fuels and somehow capture all the CO2. This is what he's pretending. And there's no science for this whatsoever. Right now in the US, if you burn $30 worth of coal, we subsidize you $150 to put it underground. That is not a scalable thing. That's not going to happen around the world. So he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. He's right that this movement wants to send us to the cave, but he's abetting them by pretending that it's compatible with using fossil fuels to be net zero by 2050. Whereas you're totally right. I think you said it was what, a death wish or death, something like that. That's what it is. Suicide note. That's exactly what it is. And that's the message that needs to be spread. Not that, oh, it's not a suicide note as long as we do my expensive carbon capture. That's BS.
The thing about COP28 that always bothers me is We see thousands of private jets landing in what might arguably be the air conditioning capital of the world, or if not the capital, one of them. How can we take it seriously, you know, when kings and princes quite literally gather to pontificate about how the little people and the poorest people in the world should put up with less? Wouldn't it be more credible if, just as a simple starter for 10, they conducted this gathering by video conferencing?
I think it reveals a lot about the nature of their goal, because what they say is, well, this is really important. And what they're recognizing is, to do really important things, you need fossil fuels. And I agree, but I think 8 billion people should be free to do important things, not just the important things that these people think are important. But the other thing that's revealing is they have an argument against the hypocrisy charge, which is right in a certain way. They say, if we fly this distance and use all this private jet fuel, then we're going to stop enough people from using fossil fuels where it'll offset it. But that basically means you're going to kill a lot of people and make them suffer. But that's the whole goal of net zero.
Are there cracks in the climate crisis, the boiling point narrative? You know, if on the one hand you're saying, and we're agreed that the cutting off of fossil fuels puts millions, billions of people back into caves, but that it's you can't have your cake and eat it, and that there are issues that need to be addressed. Is there a way to balance those books and say, can we just take literally the heat out of all this crisis talk?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're seeing this happen in the United States, where some presidential candidates are starting to make a point that I've been making for years, which is that fossil fuels on balance are a climate good, because the energy we get from fossil fuels allows us to protect ourselves from any form of climate imaginable. That's why in the US we can flourish, whether it's polar Alaska or swampy Florida or scorching Arizona, it doesn't matter. So temperature changes don't matter that much. What matters is having the energy to master temperature. The other thing is that in terms of warmth and cold, the world is way too cold for most people. We have far more people dying of cold than of heat. So the only reason this is viewed as a crisis to warm slowly with a lot of energy in a world where far more people die of cold than of heat is just the moral perspective that it's wrong for us to impact things. The idea that the climate that preceded us was somehow perfect and that we're evil change agents that can do no right. That's a primitive anti-human religion.
Bear with me, Alex. That's the anti-humanness. Ingrid, how do you feel hearing that we can regard fossil fuels as a climate good, as Alex says?
It makes absolute sense. You know, Alex, I don't know if
yes,
you're
still do.
Alex, I'd like to ask you something. We talk about the cars and all things from the past and aeroplanes and so on, but everything's got much cleaner, hasn't it? Our emissions, our CO2 emissions on all the cars, the aircraft, etc., etc., etc. So I'm even questioning, when you put that in context of how it used to be before, when the buildings were black with the soot from the emissions, at what point are we greener now than we were way before?
Yes, do we get credit for that which has been accomplished, Alex, rather than just constantly being beaten over the head?
Well, my perspective, and I talk about this a lot in my book, Fossil Future, is that kind of everything we do with energy improves our environment. The natural environment is not a hospitable place. It's naturally very deficient in resources, and it's very dangerous. And one thing we do with energy is we make ourselves masters of climate. And so we're 50 times safer in terms of deaths than we were 100 years ago from all the climate-related dangers combined. So this is one thing. Now you have to make a distinction between that and pollution. We've drastically reduced pollution because that really, really matters to us. So that's when you're talking about the soot and other things. We have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and I'm totally okay and good with finding alternatives that are cost effective. But we should not be reducing energy at all in a world where far more people die, far more people need energy. We have 3 billion people using less electricity than a typical US refrigerator. We should not be restricting fossil fuels whatsoever to stop those people from developing.
Such an important point. Alex Epstein, thank you so much. We've spoken before. I'm sure we will speak again, but thanks so much for what you've had to say so far this evening. Masters of climate.
No.
That's how we should see ourselves.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
The fossil fuels give us the control rather than us being victims.
Yeah.
We're going to another break, after which I'll be joined by the chairman of Third Generation Environmentalism, Tom Burke, who says, on the contrary, we must take action against climate change right now. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. My next guest this evening is the chairman of E3G, an independent climate change think tank with a global outlook. Tom Burke has dedicated his life to working to combat climate change and says we must act now to get rid of fossil fuels or we will regret it later. Tom joins me now. Thank you for being here again.
Evening, Neil.
The chairman of COP28 suggesting that cutting fossil fuels as you require would put unknown numbers of people back into the dark ages, back into caves. How would you have responded if you had been in the room?
If I'd been in the room, I'd have agreed with him that if that there's a real chance of putting people back into the dark ages and the caves, but only if we don't stop burning fossil fuels. He's got it the wrong way round. The real problem is the kind of destruction that will do to basic food security, water security, all the things that make life safe for us with a changing climate really will mean it won't be quite the dark ages and the caves, but it really will be very bad for people.
Do you accept that the hypothesis or the notion that we are very vulnerable to climate as a species, that 10 times as many people die of cold every year, for example, than die of heat, and that the reliable sources of energy upon which we have depended have made us safer in the face of climate?
Well, I think it was perfectly right for people to do what they did when they didn't know what they now know. So, of course, it's right for people to look after themselves. But we have got lots of better ways to make sure that we can actually do exactly what you're concerned about. Stay safe, stay warm, all of those things we need to do without putting the risk that all of that will be taken away from us.
And by that, do you mean wind, solar?
Yeah, energy efficiency, wind, solar, yeah.
And you believe that in the Northern Hemisphere, in the winter, for example, we can realistically...
Yeah, absolutely.
Persuade me.
Well, I don't know if I can, Neil. I'm prepared to take on difficult things, but persuading you would be asking a lot.
But persuade me, because it seems that so much of what I read says it's not realistic to give people reliable energy round the clock.
Put it like this, we won't do it if it's both not affordable and not reliable. Do I think it's both affordable and reliable? Yes, I do. We spend $500 million a year in this country turning off wind power that we've got available in the North Sea because we can't use it, because we haven't built the right grid today.
We can't store it.
Oh, yes, we can. You know what we do to store it? We turn it into hydrogen, and we can use hydrogen, something quite like our existing gas-fired power stations, to cope for those periods when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
There are side effects to splitting water into seawater, for example, to get hydrogen, and it generates massive amounts of chlorine, which is toxic. Is everything in place?
No, I think
to tackle that?
Sorry, Neil, that's not right. When you split water, you get hydrogen and oxygen. Well, no, hopefully, you get the oxygen, we keep it. When you split seawater, when you desalinate water, you're exactly right about that. If you try to desalinize seawater in order to get drinkable water, you create very nasty brine, which is very poisonous and toxic.
To move on a little, when it comes to the predictions of extreme danger, we've heard all of it before, have we not? All my life, I'm 56, and I'm old enough to remember when the modelers said it was going to be an ice age, which didn't happen. And now the successors to the same modelers are saying the world is on the point of catching fire. The melting of no ice at the poles, the loss of the polar bears, none of it's happened. The sea level's rising. None of it's happened. Why should we believe the latest catastrophists?
Well, I'm 77, so I've been around as long as you, and I've been listening to these stories for a bit longer than you have. And nobody's saying the world's going to catch fire. Nobody's saying that.
Boiling point. There's a lot of hyperbole.
Sorry, let me be clear. Some people are saying that, right? They're wacky. There are quite a lot of wacky people talking about this subject, so I'm not surprised that you're going to run into them from time to time. But that's not what the scientists are saying. What the scientists are saying is if we go on like this and we can track the kind of change, actually quite a lot of them are happening already. We probably put 600 quid onto everybody's bill in this country simply because climate change is making it harder to grow the food we need.
Ingrid, it's very difficult for you and I
know.
Non-scientists.
Yes, exactly. But you've got much more knowledge than I have.
We listen on the one hand to Alex, and then we listen to Tom, and it's poles apart.
Yeah.
How do you and I navigate between these extremes?
Well, it's very difficult, but I have to say this is the beauty of being able to have an open mind, because I listen to what you say, and I know where I stand on this, but I'm not would never dismiss what you say, and you have your scientific backup. But can I just ask you something? Like the Northwest Passage, that is opening up now, where it wasn't before, where it was completely iced over. But it wasn't before. So this is
Sorry, I've lost where you're going with that.
Well, where I'm going with this is that, you know, the polar melt and everything's melting. The seawater's rising, obviously, which it will do with ice and snow melt. But that has happened before.
Yeah,
we know that.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. It just wasn't civilization wasn't around at the time. We weren't around at the time. That was true. So yeah, it has.
But it's always actually been. But it's really maintained. And I think I might have mentioned this to you before about Graham Hancock, where he's taken samples deep into the ice. He got cores, and you can see the oxygen levels, and you can see the balances of the gases and everything, and it hasn't changed. Nature has a wonderful way of doing it. But what about then deforestation? Do you not think if we stop doing that and stop building houses and impermeable surfaces, that is the way really to stop it at root level, and then we can live comfortably side by side with fossil fuels?
It's a bit like taking taking medicine for diabetes, which is a good idea. So both those things are good things to do. But what you better do is stop actually eating sugar so your diabetes gets worse and worse.
OK.
Or otherwise you've got a problem. But, Neil, you know a bit about this because you're an archaeologist and you know the background. You know we've had civilizations before that have collapsed because the climate went wrong. And all that's different about now is not that something that hasn't happened to civilizations before, but we're causing it.
Climate may arguably have been a factor in the change, in the success or failure of civilizations. But what about CO2, the great bête noire of the climate crisis? Now, I read a great deal about how rising levels of CO2 are a consequence of a warmer planet, and they're not the driver of the warming of the planet. Is that true?
No. So part of it, sorry, let me be more clear, Neil. It's partly true. In other words, if we warm the planet and the permafrost melts, and the permafrost contains really vegetation that hasn't rotted, basically, and if that vegetation rots, then you'll put even more CO2, so you get a vicious spiral.
But isn't there a lag that it's about 800 years after the planet begins to warm, which it does from time to time, that the cores and the rest show an increase in the presence of CO2. That it would be analogous to looking at a horse and cart from a distance and imagining the cart was pushing the horse, when in fact it's the horse pulling the cart.
If what you're doing is taking a kind of very gigantic view from outer space over the history of the planet, then you will get periods like that. Those are driven by changes in the Earth's angle of in relation to the sun, how it spirals around, changes in geology, so changes in the way of volcanic eruptions. So those things do make change, but they make them on very, very long timetables. What we're talking about is changes that are happening inside my lifetime and your lifetime. And that's different. That's different than anything.
I find myself constantly lost because I just listen to Alex speak, and he speaks persuasively. And then 30 seconds later, I find myself listening to Tom.
I know, and it's so credible on both sides. But my instinct tells me that I don't want to follow you, Tom, although it's completely scientifically backed up, because something just doesn't quite
but I'll tell you what I
fit.
think, listening to Neil, I caught a bit of your monologue before. The bit I understand quite a lot that seems to me to be something that matters to you a lot, which is freedom too. You want people to be free to do things. And I understand that. I like to be free to do things as well. But you can't be free to do anything if you're not free from things that really destroy your possibility for life. And that's the tension in climate change. That's why people can listen to, when they don't know the science, when they're not sure who to trust, all those things with normal human beings. That's at the basis of it, judgment everybody's going to make for themselves. Which is more important, freedom to or freedom from?
No, freedom of choice.
I would say I think my ultimate question to you has to be, is it morally right to imperil the lives of billions alive today, hypothetically to improve the chances of people who don't yet exist sometime in an unknown future?
I have no idea how to answer that. I tell you what, I do think it's morally right. I think it's morally right not to do something today that will mean our children have a good chance to live. I think that would be morally wrong not to do that. And we can do something, because I think climate change, I'm not worried about what happens well after I'm gone, but I am worried about what happens to children, grandchildren, of people alive now, and if we don't solve this problem, their lives will be impaired. And I think it would be morally irresponsible not to do
Tom,
something
I'm going to let you have that last word, because it comes from an honest place. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this evening.
Thank you, Isabel.
Sadly, I have to go to a break, and then after that, it's time for something completely different, as they used to say on another show. Amateur archaeologists have found a lost Tudor palace that was once home to the grandmother of Henry VIII. Don't go away.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. My final guest this evening is the chairman of Collie Weston Historical Preservation Society in Northamptonshire. The group is made up of amateur archaeologists who have discovered the buried walls and foundations of the Collie Weston Royal Palace, which fell into disrepair around 1650 when it was bought by the Dutch Treon family, who built another house on the site. Chris Close joins me now to talk about this amazing find. Hi, Chris. I'm always hesitant. I'm always hesitant about putting amateur in front of archaeologists, as though it suggests that you know less than other archaeologists. I like one big family of archaeologists who are all just in the business of trying to find out what on earth was going on before. How did you go about doing what you've done? You know, if the establishment archaeologists couldn't find this thing, how and why did you?
Well, we've had obviously technology on our side, Neil. So really, when it comes down to it, you know, the technology side of things, modern day technology like ground penetrating radar, access to internet files and the like, has given us a distinct advantage compared to people that have tried in the past to find the palace.
What was the moment when you realised that what you were doing, that your endeavour was bearing serious fruit?
Well, there wasn't really what I call a eureka moment where we said, you know, we've now found the palace. It was really a culmination of many years of investigations and speaking to various different experts over the time. I guess the ground penetrating radar is the thing that has really shone a light as to where the palace was and ultimately how big it is.
What will your ongoing work there bring to, let's say, our understanding of and our interest in figures from the past? You know, we're talking about the grandmother of Henry VIII, mother of Henry VII. What will be added to the sum of our wisdom?
Well, the records have actually helped us change the national narrative and understanding of Lady Margaret Beaufort, who was the person most prominent of owning Collie Weston Palace. I think many of the documentaries that we see on TV have always shown this lady as being some sort of, wicked stepmother type character. One thing that we can see from the palace records is that, she was actually a very caring person. She cared deeply for the poor. She would buy them shoes. And this is something that doesn't always come across in national stories about her.
Yeah. Ingrid, what we're hearing there is so right. Margaret Beaufort, she was 12 when she was married off. She was 13 when she had her first child.
How times have
her
changed.
only child. She suffered so much during that, such an early pregnancy that she never had any more children. And yet, tenaciously, she remained there. She looked after her son. She lived long enough to see Henry VIII on the throne.
It's amazing, isn't it?
These figures, as we're hearing, they can be so maligned and so misrepresented.
Oh, completely. Well, especially the women back in those times. I mean, it's getting a lot better now, but it's still not where it really ought to be. That respect isn't really there. I am so excited about finds like this. I love the Tudor times. I love Hampton Court Palace, and I remember when it was burnt down and just sort of seeing how it was all constructed, and even shells that were used for fireproofing and soundproofing. Right. All the things that they used. It's extremely exciting.
Chris, will anything that's being revealed remain revealed? Are there long-term, plans for it to be something that tourists and history lovers could visit and see something of this missing treasure?
Yes, absolutely. So we've got an ongoing project that we've just started working in collaboration with the University of York and the Royal Palaces at Hampton for a project called the Henry on Tour project. So basically what this is trying to work out and find out more about is in 1541, Henry VIII stayed at Collie Weston, and typically he would bring 200 to 300 people with him. And what we were looking to try and find out more, what did these people eat? Where did they live? What happened to the local economy here in Collie Weston when these full entourages came to the village? So once we've got more and we know more about the palace and the layout, then we're hoping to go to 3D mock-ups of the palace, and we'll have a permanent exhibition here at St Andrew's Church in Collie Weston.
I always find that, figures like Henry VIII might even be the best exemplar, maybe Elizabeth I, but it's hard to, after all this time, really, to invest these people with reality. They've almost become cartoon caricatures of themselves. And it's so important, when you see those foundations, those low levels of floors that they once walked upon, a building that they once knew, it's almost as though a light comes on in your head and you think, oh gosh, yes, they were real. They did go to houses, they did all of the normal things of life.
Absolutely, and I think one of the bits that we've had the most fun, with this project has been not just the bricks and mortar component to the palace project, but it's been all of these little secondary stories that help put a human element to the palace and bring the palace to life.
Brilliant, Chris. I can't thank you enough. It's such a thrill always for me to catch these glimpses because I'm not in the archaeological community anymore. Thank you so much. Thanks also, of course, to my brilliant panellist, Ingrid Tarrant. Thank you for being with me. Thanks to all my guests this evening. The Saturday 5 is next up. But first, as I understand it, you're about to get your latest weather from Ellie. See you soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. It's a very unsettled picture over the next couple of days with low pressure very much in charge of our weather. The first system brought plenty of wet and windy weather named Storm Ellen by the Irish Met Service, with Storm Fergus sat out to the west, bringing further wet weather through Sunday. Back to Saturday evening, though, and a drier picture across parts of England and Wales as that band of rain has pushed its way into northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, where that heavy rain continues to fall on some very saturated ground. So some flooding is possible here. Under those clear skies, though, further south, we could see temperatures around 6 or 7 degrees, but perhaps just a little cooler across parts of Scotland. So a cloudy start across Scotland, but some sunny skies to begin with across England and Wales before the next system pushes in from the west, bringing some further spells of heavy rain and some strong winds too. Those strongest winds along those Irish Sea coasts through Sunday afternoon and evening, but that rain continues to push its way north and eastwards into parts of Scotland through Sunday afternoon. Temperatures here generally around average, but a little milder again across the southwest, around 13 or 14 degrees. It's a cloudy start to Monday for most of us, with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle at times, but some heavier rain across parts of Scotland, pushing in from the east as we go through into Monday afternoon. The best of the sunshine, though, again across Wales and parts of England, where we could see some sunny skies through the afternoon. Temperatures generally around average for the time of year, and there's some hints of something a little bit more settled on the way through next week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain.